Welcome to my bandsaw. While this channel may be dedicated towards cars, the fact of the matter is, you need certain tools to do that. Long story short, I need something that can cut tube. I need it for the frame, exhaust, and roll cage. I have an angle grinder, but it's tough to get a square cut, and sure is easy to mess up. And when you're paying $13 a foot for tube, how much money are you really saving with the grinder? I have an abrasive chop saw, but I really don't like how these cut, and it can't cut large pieces. Based off of my research, I wanted a bandsaw. So I found this on Facebook Marketplace. The guy didn't know the model, but I could tell it was an 816. Or so I thought. It worked, except the motor needed help to start. The guy said it was probably the capacitor. I believed him. Motors are cheap. Proprietary 80-year-old bandsaw parts are not. And this thing seemed to have all the important ones, so I was willing to let that slide. I was thinking, oh man, I can save a bit of money by getting an old one and just fixing it. I remember seeing this video by Wesley Kagan and thought his bandsaw was one of the coolest pieces of equipment I had seen yet. And I wanted one. Minus the part where he had to CNC his own parts just to fix it. I paid 230 slips of magical monetary value, but the guy would deliver it to my house. That's great for me, because this thing is 700 pounds of cast iron, and I don't have a truck. It would actually not be my first time putting 700 pounds of said cast iron in the back of not a truck, but you already know that story. Once I got my hands on the saw, I quickly found out this saw is actually a P42, manufactured in, you guessed it, 1942 in the United States. This P-series saw is the predecessor to the much more common 816 and 824 saws that have a horizontal cutting capacity of 16 and 24 inches respectively with an 8-inch round capacity. This P42 is dimensionally an 816. The first thing I did was order a new start capacitor, and after install I find the motor still stalls on startup. The start capacitor provides extra current for electric motors to get up to speed from stationary during startup, which is when they are weakest. If the start capacitor is not fixing the issue, that means my issue is the motor. So that was short-lived. I probably should have lowballed him more. Anyway, I ordered a new motor from Vevor with the right specs, and I swapped the pulley over and mounted it on the plate. It was when I got to wiring I found out that I was not getting around to wiring. Well, what do you mean? I mean, the old wiring insulation had degraded, and the insulation wasn't insulating. This $230 saw has already become $500. To replace it, I bought this 8-gauge extension cable and cut the end off so I could have a nice molded end. I also had to buy a 300-watt soldering gun to solder it in, because what came as a surprise to literally no one, my 40-watt one wasn't cutting it. My torch was, but it also melted the insulation. I tested it, and it started right up. It started rattling really bad, too. I asked Vevor's support team, and they told me these 4 bolts need to be tightened. So I did. Too much, and snapped it off. And it's an extremely specific M5 by 250mm bolt that sandwiches the front and rear of the motor shell. So I got to spend $40 at McMaster to get some studs to replace them. It sort of fixed the rattle, but once I got the new belt on, it became silent. So I went and did a test cut, but it didn't turn out that well. Little did I know, I was actually using the wrong tooth count blade for this thickness of steel tube. I didn't know this though, because this was my first bandsaw ever. I thought the blade was dull or the guides were off as it was cutting the piece diagonally, which is indeed a symptom of a dull blade. Well, when I was checking it out, I also found that none of the guide bearings work correctly. At this point I figure, alright, this thing has its issues. Whoever owned this saw for the decades before me obviously hasn't been treating it right. So let's just pull it all apart, and when I'm done, I'll have a saw I can be confident in. I started with taking off the guide arms and what they call the yoke, or what the guide arms mount to. The motor pulley is keyed and popped off with one nut, and 4 bolts later, the gearbox came out too. Now, why mess with the guts of the gearbox? I had to replace the old pulley as it was damaged, and when smacking on the new pulley to install it, the shaft popped out and I got to see what looked like grease in the bearings. Apparently, it's a common thing to do that when these start leaking, which it looks to have been, as evidenced by the brown trail on the bottom of it. So I figured, okay, let's pull this apart, just like everything else, and make it right. I popped it open after what came out to be over an hour of struggling, because I'm clueless as to how this comes apart, and it was, in fact, oil. Gear oil. But so old and crusty, it was probably original to 1942. I may have underestimated how messy gear oil is, but you know what? That's not my problem. Now, with the guide arms off, I can start taking apart the roller guide holders. The roller guide holders are what adjust the blade, and they just have 3 bearings each, as well as the blade brush holders on the back. Now that's just about all of the parts I can take off easily. The frame came out along with its arms, the vise, the motor start box, and the switch. So I put the saw on top of the table so I could get the legs off, and this is when I came to a realization. This plate and this plate are not stock. Someone had broken this bed and welded and bolted these pieces on to fix it. It's really not a big deal though, it still works, but I would like to fix it one day, I just don't have the equipment for it. With all the pieces off, I got around to stripping the paint. I'd like to say it was only paint that came off of it, but it looks like someone painted over metal shavings, rust, and grease. I'd rather not bore you with the hours of grinding it took to get this thing clean, and the hours I listened to the song of my people, the 15-amp angle grinder. With all the paint gone, which was a lot, and a huge pain with all the webbing under the bed, I wiped it down with Prepol. These wiring holes are a bit small for the 8-gauge cord I'm running through it, so I widened them out. Now that it's time to paint, I figured I might as well invest in a nice set of paint guns. These are the Black Widow spray guns I got for an amazing deal at Harbor Freight. That said, I don't know how to use them that well, because I'm used to using a much smaller gun. So of course, I got a trillion runs. I put way too much paint on in the first coat, but I definitely got to learn a lot about painting with this project. After a couple days of curing, I was able to put them back together and install the motor start box. I chose not to repaint the switch and start box because I wanted it like an homage to the original color, but now that I think about it, whichever ape had this before me painted over the old color, but I'll get to that later. After masking the gearbox off, I painted it, and I chose to do that black and gold color scheme again, like I did on the turbos. In hindsight, again, I probably should have assembled the gearbox and then painted it, so I could avoid masking off the insides. Yeah, there's still some junk on the gear. If it didn't come off after 2 weeks with Simple Green, I think it's pretty unlikely it's going to come off with any oil I put in there. Now, the original used a gasket, but I chose not to, because obviously, that didn't work the first time. And I can't be bothered to cut one out. I'm sure if RTV existed back when they first designed the saw, they'd use it too. Now this is the idler pulley. It sits on a slide block that tensions the blade by moving the entire pulley further away. This idle wheel uses an axle that really doesn't want to come out. I didn't want to mushroom it by hammering on it, so I figured once it wasn't budging, I would take it to the press. This is when I had the opportunity of using this garbage inside jaw bearing puller. The bearings looked fine, and I probably could have reused them, but I'm not taking this apart again. While that's soaking in the simple paint stripper, I got to install the new shaft seal for the gearbox. The original used a leather cup, but with the magic of modern technology, I had the privilege of spending $10 on the shipping of a $9 part. This bar is what engages the vice block screw by rotating a half nut on top of an oval-shaped cam. When I was first messing with the saw, the vice sliding was anything but smooth, probably in part due to the rust here. The half nut and screw weren't much better themselves. Now I can actually put the frame on the bed, which, ironically, wasn't that hard. With all the parts off, it's not that heavy. Unlike many other saws, this one sits on an axle embedded in the bed and pivots around that. The nuts are lock nuts because you're not actually supposed to torque them, or it won't pivot. Next is installing the gearbox, but before I do that, I have to press the pulley on. This time I learned my lesson and actually supported the bearing underneath so it wouldn't press itself out. I greased the drive axle so the pulley wouldn't stick, and then I got to fill the gearbox. As per the manual, it uses 1 quart of 140 weight gear oil. Because of the special bronze gear, it needs one without extreme pressure additives like typical car gear oils. This unironically took me like 20 minutes, with how this is one cold night away from being tar. Conveniently, almost every fastener on the saw is a 3/8-16 bolt, so I replaced all of them with grade 8 zinc-plated fasteners. I installed new bearings in the idler pulley, and it was an unusually tight fit. But so were the ones that I pulled out of it, which were definitely original to the saw, so I'm sure it's fine. This piece is called the rocker block. It's what adjusts the angle of the idler pulley relative to the motor and the drive pulley. It sits in the shell that is the slide block that actually tensions the pulley. I'm gonna be honest, I have no clue how adjusting this really matters, so I pretty much left it as is. Just like all the other bolt holes, I ran a tap through the yoke bolt holes as well because the fasteners didn't want to engage cleanly. Both the frame arms and the yoke use alignment pins, so I don't have to worry about alignment. Another thing I noticed was the flats on the spring handle. They were rounded over and had a tendency to pop off on their own, so I ground new flats and added 2 more that raise it even higher. Reinstalling the roller guide holders with the new bearings, I spent a solid 2 hours just trying to figure out how it even works. It was only until 3 months later did I finally get it and I was actually able to use the saw correctly. Remember that vibration I was talking about? Well, it's still here. But what I noticed was it was only present when I was using one of the smallest pulley rings. When I went bigger, it went away in its majority. Just looking at it, the first thing I noticed was that the gearbox shaft was a little bent. Okay, so I want to show you what I'm seeing. Right? When I turn it, and I know it's not at the best angle, but when I turn it, it used to be like 20 thou at the end of the shaft. What was that, 6? 5? Less? I don't know, I can't see, I'm looking through the camera. Maybe even 4 thou. And of course, you know, it's jumping around because the end of the shaft is a little bit messed up, but at least you can see it's like a quarter, maybe even less. I don't know, I didn't measure it back here at the start. I measured it near the actual bearing when I started to hit it, so I mean, it could be 1/10 of what it is, and I don't know. I'm going to put the belt on and see how it wobbles. The motor moves a lot less now. Once I fixed the shaft, it got a lot better, but it still wasn't perfect. Well, I believe that has fixed the vibration, or pretty much all of it. That is an AX belt. I'll show you. So the vibration was so bad you could see the whole head wobbling at this end. And an AX belt is a ribbed belt, and that allows it, let me take it off, that allows it to take tighter radiuses much better, as you can see. You see this drop cylinder? I made it out of a pneumatic cylinder and a needle valve because most pneumatic seals are compatible with petroleum-based oils. The issue is there isn't really a way to bleed it easily, so its adjustments are coarse and it can sometimes rip through the workpiece. And the cover, well, I still haven't finished that, but not without good reason. These old hinges are seized, and I had yet to find a suitable replacement. Until now. They're called piano hinges, and I purchased 5 feet of one, which I will cut to length. This one is aluminum, so I don't have to worry about it rusting again. That said, it means I can't weld it, so for the first time ever, I'm gonna have to rivet something in. After stripping and painting the cover, with a phosphoric acid wash that didn't want to work correctly, I cut the hinges on the bandsaw to make the cover for the bandsaw. Long story short, I messed up their position on the cover and couldn't get them to line up with the holes in the frame, so I had to cut new ones and drill the holes in the correct spot. Luckily, I have 5 feet of hinge to work with, so I have a couple tries at this. Now that I think about it, it would have been good to drill a template, make sure it matches the holes on the frame, and punch that into the hinges so I could get them perfect the first time, but they're already done. Unfortunately, the cover got a little scratched up while I was doing this, but not bad enough to warrant repainting. that's what I get for not cleaning my table. Before I get to install it, I have to extract an old broken screw, and in doing so, actually broke 2 drill bits and the extractor in the hole. So I actually got to drill it a 3rd time and helicoil it. Next was the switch box. Like I said earlier, I don't like the old paint, so of course I repainted them. Except the front cover of the actual magnetic control box has the nameplate that's riveted in. To drill them out, I would have to ruin the documentation in the back, and I don't want to do that. So I just stripped the paint around it and got close enough to not scratch the plate. The other pieces got soaked in degreaser and painted. While I had the box out, I finally got to address the blue wiring, which I'm not a fan of anymore. I found this red and black sheathing for about $10 and bought some 1.5" heat shrink to go with it. It took me a minute and some mildly sketchy disassembly to get it on the cables, but I cannot believe I didn't do this earlier. While I'm putting the box back together for install, I was reminded of the old wiring on the stop-start switch that I had yet to change. It wasn't hard to figure out with a multimeter which wire went where, and I just replaced it, except, unlike the old wiring, I used ring terminals. While I had the cables exposed, I took this as a chance to replace my tape around the connections with heat shrink and drill out the knockout holes to fit my larger clamps. With that over with, remember the drop cylinder? Well, I didn't rebuild the old one back then because I was worried I couldn't find parts for it, but then I remembered Racecar exists. See, I don't need parts for my saw, I need parts that fit my saw, even if they're not meant for it. So after pulling the cylinder apart, I ordered a new piston cup seal and wiper. 12 hours later, they arrived at my door, and I got to start putting it back together. The original rod was bent, for some odd reason. Very bent. The pictures don't show it well, but it was bad. But my dollar store V-Blocks fixed that, no problem. The night before, I cleaned and painted the cylinder and cap, but not before removing the original wiper. I was not aware of how thick the metal walls on this wiper were, but it took literal hours of hammering, and only by drilling was I able to get it out. I realized after that it's this thick to act like a hard stop for the piston when it reaches the limit of its travel. Otherwise it would destroy the seal. But I have a fix for that. After peeling the old cup seal off, I now realize that my new cup seal is significantly thicker. Because the retaining bolt is only so long, I have to omit the copper washer that normally goes under the nut that keeps a smooth and stationary surface to press against the cup seal. This is blasphemy, but if you thought that was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Before I can put the new seal on, I have to fix the issue that I created earlier with the limit stop. How do I do that? By welding a washer on top of the piston so that it hits the cap itself and not the wiper. Now these cup seals normally come super stiff from factory and soften up for install through some manufacturer specified means. Well, I thought I was better than that, and I got to learn why you don't use a hose clamp like a piston ring installer. While that obviously didn't work, I actually got the seal in by compressing it as tight as I could with the clamp, and then taking the clamp off and popping it in before the seal expanded again. It took a bit of effort, but I actually did get it in, despite how unbelievably tight of a fit it was. Once I got the cylinder back together and filled, I installed it on the saw and it works. It holds the saw up. As far as I can tell, it doesn't leak. I sanded and waxed the bed surface, and after putting the vices back on, I waxed those too and cleaned it up. After only 8 months and like $1,000, I finally have a working bandsaw. And if you ask me, who's probably pretty biased, I think it looks great. With this project done, I'm finally able to move on to the frame and various other videos I have almost done. Which should come as a surprise to nobody. I use this saw a lot on my frame, and it wouldn't make sense to have the frame and then the bandsaw that I used to make it. Anyway, I had to leave a ton out of this video to keep it from running on to over an hour and to not confuse anyone watching. I hope you guys got some understanding of the scale of this project that I had to deal with. Now that it's over with, I hope to see you guys in the frame video that will at least be a little bit more coherent.
It will stop itself.